two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Caroline Byrne. She's an alumna of Cornell, class of 98, and we'll be talking about taxes in a university town. I'll kind of give the intro. It's budget time in both the city of Ithaca and in Tompkins County. Both the county and the legislature and the city council are working on budgets right now. And what's very typical for both at this time of year is that money is very tight. Money is basically tight because there are only two basic sources of tax money for both city and county: property taxes and sales taxes. And both are very hard on low-income people. The much better kind of tax to use is income taxes. The federal government and the state can have income taxes. They don't make their taxes sufficiently steep on high income people. They make them a little too high on middle income people and low income people, but at least those are somewhat fairer taxes than either the property tax, which taxes the very home that you live in, or sales taxes, where you need something, you buy it, and you pay a tax. Well, not on food and medicines, but on most other things that you need. There's yet another local property and sales tax based entity, and that's the Ithaca City School District, or school districts, because all of this, applies in other counties as well. The school tax is actually the largest property tax that we all pay. A very normal sized house, $4,500 a year. For such a house, the city pay tax is more like a little over $3,000. The county tax, just over half of that. So that gives you some idea of the proportion of our taxes that we pay to different governmental entities, local governmental entities here. The property tax, that is the school property tax, actually gets reduced on a house like the one I was talking about, reduced by about $500 per year for people who have the star exemption, and that is very widely available. And that's actually a bit of a problematic maneuver, because while it gives relief to moderate income homeowners, it doesn't give any relief, as far as I know, to people who live in apartments. Now, you might have that misconception, that mistake that people often make when they say that renters don't pay property taxes. You're smiling. It's not true. Renters pay property taxes. They just don't write them in a separate check. Their property taxes are folded into the rents that they pay. And it is one reason why rents here are so high, because of all these property taxes that get passed on to the renters. I will say there is one exception to this. If you live in public housing, or if you live in dedicated low-income housing, there probably that housing property has probably been taken off the tax rolls, probably pays what's called a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, which is much lower. So some of the lowest income people aren't passing property taxes through to in their rents, but many are, because they just don't live in such specially designated buildings. And of course, your average renter is passing a very heavy property tax on to the landlord. Now, there's a special problem in this community, which is that so much of the real estate is tax exempt. Exempting from taxes, that's fine when it's for something like our schools, our libraries, our churches, public housing, low-income housing, things that are of use to the inhabitants of this community. But it's much more questionable when it goes to a college or a university that largely serves middle and high-income students, likely from all over the country or all over the world. And I would say it's even more questionable when it's supporting things that essentially serve corporations. And we'll get back to that. Caroline, you may have more to add about tax exemptions.
Well, sure. First, I want to thank you for actually giving actual numbers to like how much people pay in these taxes, because I feel like, it's a mystery to a lot of people, or probably renters, partly because it's embarrassing. Like, it's a little embarrassing to talk about how much we pay in these taxes, I think. And then also like, yeah, that makes total sense that this just shouldn't even be so based on these property taxes in the first place. And if it was more based on income taxes, then it would be a more progressive tax, yeah. And I also want to say, I went to Cornell. I come from this, I studied art and stuff. I'm not really an expert in these things. It's more of like, I studied art and design. I didn't think I got the best education at Cornell. So I'm a bit of a Cornell. I already had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about Cornell, because it just seemed more, to go there for undergrad when everyone is geared towards their this high level research and not necessarily teaching. But I know some people had great experiences. I had great experiences in my electives and things like that. It's just my actual major. I didn't learn what I was supposed to learn. But anyway, so I had a little chip on my shoulder. When I moved back here, there's different things. I had a job where, it was sort of one of these not real jobs at Cornell. Is like a long-term temp job that they keep you on. So you're like under their lowest, their pay rate for these full-time people, which starts pretty high, I think. But then the thing is, half the people that work for Cornell aren't even making those salaries. So they have, you create this divide, already. I'm kind of getting off topic a little, but I just want to say there's a lot of different factors and why I got involved. I own a home and, I have, it's, expensive. I have a tenant. I have to pass on these expenses to my tenant, so, it's a lot. And then there's this question, we'll get to in a minute, about how much of Cornell is how much of these universities are even public goods. But, I'll just there's the statistics for the city and the county. I'm a little sketchy about the school district because the school district is like a bit random, and I'm not easily finding statistics online about how much Cornell owns of the property that's in the school district. In the school district, I haven't looked at the recent statistics, but I think they pay like $400,000 into the, as a voluntary payment, something around that. And maybe it's a little higher, but, if they would be paying millions and millions of dollars if they were actually paying probably the amount of money that they owe, if they weren't tax exempt, basically. Mm-hmm. So, and the same thing is true for the city. Like it's about a half, which is a lot. The Cornell is about half of the property in Ithaca, the city of Ithaca, and the county, it's more like a quarter or like a little less than a quarter. the statistic I saw was like, it was like 26% between Cornell and IC. So it is like much less in the county, but it's still a lot. And that's only, and there are other nonprofits too that make that, would make that statistic higher. It's just that Cornell is the large, the biggest out of all of these. It's also like nonprofits in general they have to have some sort of accountability and transparency. Like these smaller nonprofits, they really have to, even the city government is different, but, it's like they have to, kind of be accountable to all their expenses. And Cornell basically puts out nothing. I mean, if you look at the Cornell tax form that they have to put into, for the government, it's combined with the city, the medical school in the city. So all the high numbers that they have to put in, like the highest numbers for the faculty that they pay out, highest numbers for events, those are all under the medical school. So there's hardly anything in there that even talks about, this huge corporation in the city of Ithaca. So it's just kind of nuts that there's so little accountability. And it's funny because even this thing online, this is called the Charity Navigator, I used to look at, and they at one point, because I would look at for the highest paid faculty, and at one point they were like, we're not doing schools anymore. So I couldn't find Cornell because they were like, they're not charities. Hello. But anyway, so I'm getting off topic, but I don't know if you want to say something after that, Teresa.
I think we're actually, for the most part, on topic.
Oh, good.
We're talking about the impact of in particular, Cornell. We're not really focusing on Ithaca College, even though we know it's there.
Right.
But this all started in a way when you told us about a new book that was out by Davarian Baldwin, who's a professor at Trinity College. And the book is called In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. And perhaps you could tell us a bit about this book. I mean, beyond just to say that we're not alone here in Ithaca.
Right. We're not alone. Here's the book. I don't know. I know part of this goes on the radio, but I'd read an article that had this professor in it like years ago when I was really, interested in this topic and paying attention to Cornell. And he, I wrote him and he wrote me back this really nice email. I mean, I basically wrote to complain about Cornell and things. But anyway, so he's a nice guy. But anyway, he wrote this book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. And he's talking about, he's Black. He's coming from Hartford, Connecticut, which, and he's in this like, arts, this liberal arts school, which I'm assuming is mostly white people and surrounded by people that are not white, like nearby. So he has sort of a different perspective where it's like, he talks a lot about, talks about University of Chicago and the South Side of Chicago. And, he talks about, Columbia, and Teresa, you know a little bit about that too, but he talks about Columbia a lot. And
yes, I was at Columbia in 1968 when one of the things that precipitated the revolt of the of many of the students under SDS was Columbia's plan to build a gymnasium in a public park, which never happened.
Right. Yeah. So he talks a lot about that story, which is interesting. They even got a letter in support from Chairman Mao, which I thought was funny. but anyway,
I didn't know that. I never heard that back then.
Yes, they did. So anyway, but he basically talks about like the problems that we have here or in college towns are problems that are like everywhere and they're getting bigger like all over the country. He also talks about University of Arizona Arizona State University in Phoenix. But he talks about how these schools, the development of these schools, and a lot of times, I don't quite think this is happening here, but you'll have like this very colonial, point of view, like, oh, there's nothing going on in this area, so we need to take over, or this is a really terrible area, so we need to take over, that sort of thing. And these schools are really like taking over. And it's a very, it's kind of insulting to the people that live there and do all this stuff there, that these areas are like nothing and don't exist. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of it is just really about gentrification and how schools play like a major role in gentrification. And I know here, I don't know who did this research, if it was DSA or Ithaca Tenants Union, but that really startling statistic about how many Black people that lived in Ithaca have moved up to like West Hill, over really a short period of time.
That
So
is to
it's like,
say, West Hill outside the city.
right outside the city, yeah. So it's happening here. It's just different because it's like mostly white people here to begin with. But but yeah, so it's a good book. I read it like, it's all these stories about, different, he talks to all these different people. So it's stories about high level administration, these basically like developer people, that are, not good. he'll interview all different kinds of people. And then these sort of community organizers, and there's all these stories about, there's like people that work for the university that think they're doing good, but then the university, does what they do. They're not going to go along with with people. So I don't know, it's just really interesting. Anyway, I think it's a good book to read. And it's like going through the book, trying to figure out what is relevant here and realizing I don't know enough about what is going on here. Like, it's like really complicated. And, I sort of check in and out of like the whole situation. Anyway, so I recommend it.
Yeah, sounds like a useful aspect of this book is that it raises questions that we're going to have to pursue about how they play out in this community.
Right. Yep.
But one thing that I think you said you do know is that Cornell is growing, and perhaps you could comment on that.
Yeah, so Cornell, is all these schools, I think everyone realizes are, every year they get dramatically more expensive, which, goes way beyond any sort of inflation rate. These numbers, they're really insane. Like, but what is also happening at Cornell is Cornell has been growing. And a couple of years ago, I read an article where they sort of announced like, yes, we're growing, and they're building all these new dorms. But the thing is, they were growing for like 10 years before they sort of publicly announced that they were growing. And if you look at like the amount of people from year to year, of course it goes up and down because you don't know how many people are going to, decide to go to Cornell, so. But if you have like a pattern, like over 5 years where they've grown like 1,000 people or 2,000 people, it's pretty dramatic. And here I'll just give you like this years I'm picking are a little random, but at one point I was looking at what was going on like before the financial crisis and then like 10 years later to see, because a lot of these schools will always blame the states for not contributing enough, because at one point they did drop off a lot of contributions to the schools, and then they put a lot of the payment onto the students and like student loans and sort of things. And it's a huge problem all over the country, so I don't mean to minimize it, but at a school like Cornell, like a really wealthy school like Cornell, it's a really small percentage of the money that they're working with. So when Cornell uses something like that as an excuse, like the state isn't contributing enough money, it's kind of it's a little disingenuous. So just to give you the stats, like in 2007, there was like 19,800 people, so less than 2,000 people. And then in 2019, which is just this recent number, I saw it'd be more now, but 2019 is like over 24,000. So, that's over 4,000 over 15 years. So, and then it's gone up. And it's gone up more recently in the past like 5 years and probably will continue to go up. Unfortunately, I have a little bit of this graph, but it only goes to 2016. But I think now that it's going up at an even higher rate than it was going up. Because it wasn't really going up at all, like between like 2002 and 2007, it was basically like stable. And then it started going up. And it started going up like right after the financial crisis, which I don't think is a coincidence, that they're just they're getting more and more people and charging more and more money every year. And they're actually pulling in like $300,000 more a year from student tuition, than they would have been in a year like in 2006 or something like that. So 300 million. I don't know if I said the right, 300 million. So it's a good chunk of money. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that, I mean, obviously, if they're getting bigger, they should be contributing more. It's just like an obvious point, but
Yeah, they're having more impact on the community.
right, right.
Clearly.
They're driving on the roads more and everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, of course, a lot of the local economy is based off of Cornell. I mean, there are all the houses and apartment buildings that rent to students and collect income from them. In that way, there are the restaurants that cater to them, and presumably just lots of, clothing stores and doctors and whatever, what have you. And I guess people would say that this is a positive thing for the community in so long as these profits go to local businesses who then spend their money locally. But I think we know it's not always local businesses.
Right.
I
I don't, yeah. I mean, we have the situation with these big housing developments where, there's one downtown, the city center, and then there's one I was reading about that's in College Town, but, I'm not sure, you might know more than this than me, like who originally developed them, but they're really owned and operated by these, like, multinational corporations. Like there's this private equity firm, firms and this sort of thing. So there's nothing like local about who's running these buildings. And some of them, the city center downtown, I think, has that tax exempt, which the book we're talking about talks a lot about that. These like tax exempt things.
No, okay, not quite. Let me get the term right. Let me correct the term.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah.
City center is not tax exempt, but city center got what is called a tax abatement.
Oh, right.
This means that for 7 or 10 years, that the property taxes are reduced. They start at where they were when it was just a parking lot or something. I think it was mostly a one-story building, and then gradually go up to meet the full assessment. There is a serious question whether city center ever needed that tax abatement, but they got it.
Right. I know. I feel like in the beginning, they just did this stuff really fast, and then people started like critiquing it, yeah, I'm curious, like, because they sold the city center to this other,
another corporation.
Another corporation. And I'm curious what's going to happen after those tax abatements run out. Like if they're going to, eventually, I don't know what's going to happen, but anyway, and then you also have just Cornell. Like I don't even know this stuff, but who do they license with for food and all this stuff? Like in the book, he actually has an example of this school that has like that gets all this, that seems like a dream, but they have all these local contracts with food distributors and stuff. But that would be great if Cornell was, getting local. But anyway, these are all these national corporations that kind of, follow these schools that are built around these schools. And I don't remember if it's in the book or in a radio interview, but they're very involved, and also even compares it to like private prisons, like how they have this sort of captive audience, in a less literal way, but it's like, anyway,
yeah. Okay. Well, a couple of other things. You mentioned this Bayh-Dole Act. Or is it Bayh-Dole?
Bayh-Dole, I guess is how it's pronounced.
Which changed things a decade or so ago.
Right. Well, it was actually in 1980, I think was when it started. But what
that long
happened
ago.
is, yeah, but what happened is, sorry, the light's getting a little weird.
Yeah.
But they used to, when you get federal money from the government for research, it was like a big, like, quote, bureaucratic issue because you had to go through the government to get your patents and all sorts of things. And the Bayh-Dole Act, under Reagan, simplified things a lot for corporations and for universities. So it's like it was like easier for the corporations to kind of work directly with the university. So, in Princeton, actually tried the citizens in, I think it was Princeton. Hold on, I wonder if it might be somewhere else. But they actually, yeah, he talks about it here. I've read about it before, but people actually got together and sued the school for money for where they lived because the school had all this money in intellectual property rights. Because basically the Bayh-Dole Act gave the universities a lot more power and that they had, control over these patents and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't totally understand how it works, but anyway, but they won, they won in this case because, if the school has like millions of dollars that they've made, it's not they're not kind of not act, they should act as a public good, basically.
Yeah. And I think there is also a question about the research that goes on, because Cornell, for instance, is very heavily a research institution.
Right.
And again, it would be a sort of public use if it was all what you call pure science, pure research, but it isn't. A lot of it is very, well, take it away. Tell us who they do research for.
Well, a lot of the research they do, I think, is very controversial. I mean, I feel like a lot, they do a lot of good things, but they also do a lot of bad things. I mean, they're sort of representative of like the world, and like, everything that we know about, like every pesticide, every little thing we know about has come out of it. Every bad philosophy, everything has come out of these universities. So it's like, so it's like, right, currently, they have this partnership with Lockheed Martin, I think since like 2010, they do, they do nuclear weapons research. They have something, they have contract through like, grants through like Sandia and through the, the National Nuclear Stockpile, the NNSA. And then, they have a lot of they get a lot of military grants, and this is just what's going on in engineering and chemistry. There's also, ag does a lot of controversial things, I think.
This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.